It's fake Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes in Theory, Episode 8, to have done with the consumption of popular culture.
All the things we never needed, I don't need them now. All the things we ever did were always confidential and hidden from me anyhow. You can stand all night at a red light anywhere in town, hailing Marys left and right, but none of them slow down. I've seen the best of men go past, I don't wanna be the last. Give me something first, God knows everybody.
I recorded most of this episode while driving, and I recorded it on my phone, so the audio quality is going to be worse than usual. And also, I'm not able to find enough time to really edit this episode as much as I would normally like to. But this is the way that it has to be if I'm going to get an episode out. I have to say that I've been pleased with the amount of downloads that some of my older episodes have been getting. So I thought that I should put out some new content, even though for the last 6 months I just haven't had the time or the inclination to put much out. But I hope you get something out of this, and if you do, like, share, and subscribe. And I have the Fake Andy Warhol Substack. There's Instagram / Fake Andy Warhol, all one word. And of course, on Amazon, there is the Warhol Christian book, the book that shouldn't exist but does. I want to apologize for the lower than usual quality. I'm mostly speaking off the top of my head, so if I make some logical errors, I probably do. But this is just the way that it has to be if I was going to get an episode out. Thanks very much for listening. Okay, I'm going on a drive, and for probably the 100th time, I'm going to record an audio that I'm probably not going to post. I'd like to post this, but for whatever reason, at the end of my trips, I just don't get around to posting audios. But maybe, and I could go into the reasons why, but that would be pretty tedious. I think probably to hedge my bets and make it slightly more likely for me to post, I'm just going to try to talk about something for an hour or two, and we'll see if it works. What I want to talk about is going to be somewhat focused, but I'm also going to go on some slight tangents, and I'm probably going to get into a quagmire of talking about comic books at some point. But overall, what I wanted to talk about was popular culture and the roots of popular culture. I would like to touch on that, and I'm going to bring it around to talking about the people online who are upset about popular culture now due to political overtones or undertones, mostly overtones, and what they're upset about, what they're not seeing, what they don't realize. And just to jump right into it, I think what they don't realize is that pop culture is almost synonymous with fake culture. Pop culture itself, the term, it wasn't, I'm sure the term was not intentionally made to obfuscate this, but just by saying that something's popular culture, well, wasn't mythology popular culture? Wasn't folktales popular culture? Yeah, but what is the difference when we say the term pop culture? Well, it's fake culture. It's corporate controlled culture. It's imposed culture. The people who create pop culture sort of project it onto the population, and they almost announce it as a fait accompli. I'm producing popular culture. Why is it popular? Well, because it's made for a large audience, and it's projected at that large audience by artificial means, by the aid of technology, via TV, the radio, the cinema, the internet. Now, having said that, and having said that it's almost the same thing to say pop culture and fake culture, doesn't necessarily mean that pop culture is evil. Doesn't necessarily mean that pop culture is evil. Doesn't mean that there's not pop culture that I like, that I enjoy, that I think is innocuous, that I think is somewhat helpful in some ways. But the first thing we have to understand is that pop culture is artificial. Pop culture is fake culture. It pretends to be mythology, and it kind of becomes an ersatz mythology or an ersatz religion, which is a lot of what I talk about in Warhol Christian. That's one of the themes, the mythology theme that Warhol in particular wanted to become the sort of secular pope, the pope of pop. He wanted to become sort of Jesus on earth of pop culture. And the thing about how he did silk screens that were like icons of saints that he saw while in church, well, he was drawing the obvious and profound and tedious comparison between celebrities and saints or celestial stars. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, where I want to bring this, because if I start talking about this, any aspect of it, I'm just going to eat up all the time. So I'm going to have to try to move on, even if I'm going to leave some things unsaid. Where I want to bring this in a hurry is J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien is looked at as like the classic of all classics in terms of, I mean, it's almost amongst Tolkien people, calling Tolkien pop culture is almost an insult because they think, oh, this is more than pop culture. This is the OG stuff. This is classic fantasy stuff. This is really good. This is like, you know, the best author of the last 150 years or 100 years. This is the guy. This is the most genuine, the most humanistic. This is high fantasy. This is for the masses and also very thoughtful, very intellectual, with all sorts of roots into languages and mythology and European history and all this stuff that was just sort of like tied up in a bow with Professor Tolkien's work. And you're probably hearing a slight mocking tone as I speak about this. And I want to just hurriedly say that, I have a positive experience and a positive engagement with Tolkien's work. When I was a little kid, before I could read, almost before I could understand language, my dad read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings books to me. I think he maybe read some of the Silmarillion too, but not much. But I want to say that he read and reread The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to me 2 or 3 times. Obviously wanted to share it with me because he loved it when he was younger, when he was a teenager or in his 20s. And he shared it with me when I was 3 or 4 years old. And some of the earliest memories I have is just falling asleep because he'd read it to me at night. I would fall asleep listening to him read Tolkien's work. And, at the beginning of each night, he would say, okay, well, I don't know, what do you remember from last night? When did you drift off? Do you remember this part with the Ents? Do you remember this part with the trolls? Do you remember when Aragorn did this? No? Okay, well, we'll start a few pages before that. And he did this for months on end. It wasn't like every night, all the time, but it was often when I was young, before I even went to school, I think. So, I mean, in some sense, the work of J.R.R. Tolkien is definitely bound up in some of my most treasured moments of my childhood and connected to my father, and it's nothing but positive. Then we read The Hobbit in school, and that was a positive experience too. I probably read it twice when I was a teenager, I would say. I don't think I've ever read the Lord of the Rings books, just because I don't really feel like I never felt like I had to. I always felt like they were internalized in me. Now, am I going to win like Tolkien trivia contests? No. But I like those books, and hey, maybe at some point I will reread them. You know, I have nothing but fondness for them, and but I have not reread them as an adult. I've never actually read them. I don't own copies of them. I mean, when my dad passes on, I'm sure I'll inherit, you know, the multiple copies of those books that he has. Maybe I'll read them at that point. That's kind of a sad thing to think about, but maybe I will do something like that. Now, I say all that to give you an idea of where I'm at with Tolkien's work. Because what I want to say now is I want to point out that Tolkien's work is a manufactured, fake, artificial mythology. It's not real mythology. It's a counterfeit of mythology. That doesn't mean it's not impressive. It's impressive as hell. That doesn't mean it doesn't contain, like, goodness, wisdom, truth. It contains all those things. I would consider Tolkien's work to be a pretty good thing for young people to read or to be exposed to learn lessons about the world, and even to lessons about, like, our heritage. Not just even, like, European heritage, but, like, kind of the heritage of, like, humanity. Now, as we're going to get into, there's all this controversy about like non-white actors in Tolkien's work being adapted to a TV show and all this stuff. But was Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's work, was it more or less like a recapitulation and a remix of European folklore, mythology? Yeah, certainly centered on European folkloric heritage, absolutely. But I think that the themes in the work are certainly broad enough, not only to appeal to all sorts of different people, but to sort of tap into any sort of human mythology, whether African, Asian, what have you. Anyone can relate to J.R.R. Tolkien, and anyone can sort of sense their own culture's heritage being echoed in things that are in J.R.R. Tolkien's work. But it's still fake, it's still artificial, it's still pop culture. The effect of pop culture is to sever the connection to folklore, tradition, mythology, and religion. Now, so you can sense in The Lord of the Rings, oh, this is like our folkloric history. But you're not engaging with Celtic mythology. You're not engaging with the Eddas of the Northern Europeans. You're not learning about holy superstitions to sort of like mix religion and folklore together. You're not learning about that stuff. You're not engaging with that stuff. You are consuming an echo, a remixed echo of all of that that's done in a very artful way, that isn't done in a disrespectful way, and that's done in a way that you can get something from it, certainly. But it's not real culture. It's not genuine, authentic culture. It's not European heritage so much as it is a reconfiguration being authored by an individual, much more so than being authored by an entire culture. That's part of why it's inauthentic. And it's pop culture, and it became movies and action figures and comic books and cartoons, and all that's fun. But it is a sort of surrogate cultural experience, which all pop culture, there's a layer of fakeness, there's a layer of removal. You are, a step or two removed from something authentic when you engage with pop culture. Now, the things that you're removed from, maybe it's impossible for you to engage with genuine folkloric tradition in the modern age. So if you're not going to be able to engage with that stuff in an authentic way anyway, then, well, the next best thing is Lord of the Rings. So, would you rather have that or nothing at all? Well, maybe it would be better if pop culture at this point didn't exist. I will just throw that out there. But I can certainly, what I'm saying in saying all this is, I'm not chastising Professor Tolkien. I'm not calling out fans of his or the subculture that's grown up around his work. But it is what it is, and it's pop culture. It's not genuine mythology. People take it. Here's some of the problem. People take it as genuine culture. This leads to problems. Now, the people complaining about the new Amazon Lord of the Rings TV show, they're on target with a lot of their criticisms. They're over the line, I think, in some criticisms. To get into exactly what the criticisms are would be really tedious. Other people are already going into that. They go into at great length and in great detail everything. What the actors say in interviews, what the writers and the showrunners say, what happens in the actual shows, they go into all of it. Now, I'm just going to be, like I said, I'm just going to be skipping around somewhat when I talk about this. So, I'm not going to be able to make neat and perfectly continuous arguments between the different subject matter. But we're going to talk about what's going on now. And what I've noticed in the last few days is a lot of the YouTubers and I'm sure it's on Twitter too and probably Facebook too, but I don't go on those sites. Where I see this is YouTube, and I see them, the critics of the Amazon Lord of the Rings show, I see them gleefully making the comparison between the new Lord of the Rings show and this HBO House of the Dragon George R. Martin show. And what they're saying in the headlines and in the thumbnails is, aha, see, the House of Dragons beats, clobbers Amazon's Rings of Power. House of the Dragons just is the Chad show, and look at how they're squashing stupid Amazon's Lord of the Rings. And what I want to call your attention to is how these people, they need the dialectic. This is the same shit as my blue candidate is so much better than your red candidate, or vice versa.
Yeah, look at this. Look at the Republicans stomping the Democrat candidate, or the other way around too. They need the fucking good guy and the bad guy in their head, even if the person that they hold up as the good guy or the good show or whatever isn't really that great. And if they were to just examine that thing on its own, which they do sometimes, they say, hey, look, this is not great. But they're so happy when they can find the good consumer choice and the bad consumer choice. They're so happy. They need to consume something. In the first episode that I made, or I think it was like the 0 episode of this podcast, if I put it up, I said that I was somewhat impressed with some of the cultural critics on YouTube. Are they conservative? I don't really see them championing conservative precepts or anything. I don't see that. They're just basically anti-SJW, quote unquote. But now I'm seeing a lot of these same people, at least now when I'm sort of paying attention to them, which I don't always do. I'm seeing them just really happy to have some other show that they can say, this is good. See, I'm not just a hater on all of it. I would just not put effort into this false dichotomy. And I would hazard to say that a lot of these YouTubers, a lot of these critics, maybe in the live streams that they're uploading. I don't fucking listen to all of them, not by any means. In the grand scheme of things, I barely listen to any of it. But I get the impression that, if you talk to them, or maybe if you let them ramble on, they would just outright say, if House of Dragons was on its own, I probably wouldn't even care. I'd be a little bit disappointed. But hey, as it is, it's looking pretty good compared to the Lord of the Rings show, yeah, it's really not that bad. Yeah, I'm actually enjoying it. They would tell you that it's not great, probably. Just like a lot of these, political people will tell you, hey, look, the candidate that I want, he's not great, but, he's looking pretty good compared to the other guy right now, right? Well, I would want, if I could have an influence, I would want more people to just reject the entire system, or at least care less about investing in it to prop something in it up. Here's another leap that we're not going to go into, but I'm just going to say it because I think it's a good point. I think that if we're going to have any sort of laws or whatever influenced by environmentalism or climate change, then the absolute first thing that needs to go is all entertainment production. We need to cease all cultural production. And by that, I mean, obviously, pop cultural production. Just on the fact that it's not needed, that it is a waste of energy. You can say, okay, it gives off carbon dioxide, whatever. I don't care what the specifics of the argument are. I don't care. But if we're going to do that, if we're going to do it, then the first thing that needs to go is all cultural production. Hollywood needs to be completely shut down. All of these film studios, they need to be shut down. Because we already have more than enough video entertainment, TV shows, films. We already have more than enough to last us, I would say, forever. It's more than anyone can consume in a lifetime. It's more than anyone would want to consume. I would just shut it the fuck down because we have an overabundance of fake culture that is being spammed at us. What do they call it? Culture jamming. We have too much culture jamming, period. We don't need this stuff. This is all fake. We do not need any of it. None of it. So that would be purely good. Now that's not going to happen because the people who are in charge of things, they like Hollywood. You can say, well, they like it for social control and propaganda. I mean, in some cases, that's certainly true. But they just like it, and people want to consume whatever. They want new. They want new stuff, and that's what the modern world is. It's always the new thing. It's the news. People in genuine cultures, people in the pre-modern world. And I'm not saying we need to return to that. We can't just return to that. But people before all this bullshit hype machine started, mass culture, mass media, you didn't need to be up to date on everything. You didn't need to know breaking news when it happened. You didn't need to know it. And people were saner because of it, because they weren't always in a frenzied state of knowing news on the other side of the planet as soon as it happened. We don't need to know that, but now a lot of the pressure to know that is because everyone you encounter is going to be saying, hey, did you hear what happened in Australia today? Hey, did you hear about that thing that happened in Zimbabwe? Hey, did you hear that this sports team just now, this happened? Did you hear that? Hey, did you hear what this actor said about this? He just tweeted it out. Look, did you hear that? And even beyond that, it's what the new cultural productions are. Now, I heard over the weekend some antique shop guy was talking about how, hey, they're going to replay Jaws at the local theater. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it is cool. So it's not like we don't ever, show old shit in a public way. It's not as though people in their private homes don't go back and watch old shit. Of course they do, yeah. But there's still this preoccupation with, hey, most of what I need to be having occupy my screen or what I put in front of my eyeballs is new stuff. The new show, the new movie, the new music video. And I think it would be good to try to stop that. Now, if I just say it would be good and I want that stopped, that makes me sound like a fucking dictator. All I'm saying is that I think it would be good to just try to stop it. Even if it's just in your own life. And I think that individual or collective efforts, even on a very small scale, to stop consuming new culture, I put culture in quotation marks, I think that just the attempt to try to stop it, the experience of the trying to stop it, would teach people a lot about the way this world works. The pressures that people feel about being up to date on bullshit. Just feeling that pressure firsthand, or not feeling it if you stop giving a shit. Like, I used to like hockey. I guess I would still say I do. But I haven't watched a new hockey game in a long time, except when I was... I don't know. Have I watched hockey at someone else's house? I watched college football at someone else's house this past weekend, but I don't give a shit about college football. I had an okay time glancing up at the screen. But hockey was something that I liked to watch, that I would watch on my own. And I haven't felt the need to watch sports since spring of 2020, when all the leagues halted. And I've said in previous audios that I think it would have been good if we just stopped professional sports. That goes along with what I was just talking about, with stopping the production of culture. I just think it would be better if people weren't occupied with it. And so many of these people that have problems with the big studios and the big corporations, cultural productions, they have problems with it for like political reasons now, and they're not going far enough in their view. It's not like they haven't expanded their outlook. I think they have. They've expanded their outlook and they've deepened their hatred and resentment of the people who make this shit. But that's not really what I'm talking about. They need to like broaden their understanding of what this stuff is, because they complain about the Walt Disney Company more than they complain about any other company. They talk about how Disney is perverting their beloved franchises. Disney is ruining Star Wars and they're ruining Marvel. They say, take me back to the good Disney. To the good Disney of the 90s, or the 2000s, or the 2010s even, or take me back to the classic Disney of the 50s and 60s and 40s and 30s and 70s and blah, blah, blah. What did Disney start things off by doing? I don't mean his first cartoon. I mean when he really started to expand into films and that kind of stuff. When he started to really expand, what did Saint Walt do? He did his own versions of fairy tales and folk tales. What did I talk about with Saint Tolkien? The same thing, pretty much, sort of, that I'm going to talk about with Saint Walt. He took genuine culture, he remixed it and cheapened it. He made it more palatable for the masses. So the classic Disney is ersatz folklore. Just like J.R.R. Tolkien is ersatz folklore. Now, I think J.R.R. Tolkien is, I would say, he's a better author, obviously. He has more linguistic and literary talent. And since I value those traits, I would put Tolkien above Walt Disney. Walt Disney, I think, was Andy Warhol's favorite artist. He said that, or something close to that, a few times. He called Walt Disney the greatest living artist, even after Walt Disney had passed away. His justification was that Walt Disney was being cryogenically preserved, so he still counted as a living artist. Well, whatever. I mean, Warhol's judgment, superficial as Warhol could be at times, Warhol's judgment counts for a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's tough to say that there was an artist in the 20th century that had more impact, or more skillful impact, I guess you could say, art in it in the broadest sense possible, than Walt had. I mean, the footprint that Walt Disney had, of course, Walt Disney is not drawing every frame of animation. Walt Disney did not even design every single character that we think of when we think of the classic Walt Disney characters and the classic Walt Disney designs for the characters, including the pre-existing characters like Snow White, Cinderella. But in some sense, there was an approval process, and they all count under the umbrella of the Walt Disney Studio. He does, in some sense, get real credit for that, the same way that Warhol gets real credit for everything put out in his name, even if he didn't actually do all of the silkscreen work himself, which he did not. He did not even supervise it. He did not really even sign off on all of it either. As I've talked about and I've played the clip, he did not do a big round of the Last Supper silkscreens. He didn't even see them until they were unveiled for the first showing in Italy, I believe. So he didn't even sign off on them. He had to sign them, but he didn't really even sign off on them. He was just like, oh, okay, these are the ones that my assistants made. Now, probably if one of them was complete crap or not to his liking in some way, he probably would have said, okay, look, we're not going to show that one. So I'm not going to say 1,000% he didn't sign off on them, but you can build a good argument that he didn't really even, give careful consideration to some of the work that went out under his name that he did not have a hand in or supervise. He didn't even sign off on them when they were unveiled. But again, I'm getting off track. Oh yeah, Walt Disney's influence. So Walt Disney takes, and we've all heard this, we've all heard people say, hey, if you ever read those original Brothers Grimm tales, which there again too, I mean, the Brothers Grimm collected tales. So when people say, if you read the original Brothers Grimm tales, or more to the point, if you've ever heard the 1800s or 1700s or earlier versions of some of these stories like Hansel and Gretel or a lot of the other fairy tales that came to be known as fairy tales, the original versions are horrible and scary and brutal and just awful. So what did Disney do? And I'm not even saying he was the first one to do this, because probably these fairy tales were repackaged to some extent for kids in the early 1900s. I mean, if in the 1800s, I think the 1800s, the Lambs, there's this couple, this husband and wife, I want to say Charles and Mary Lamb, I could be wrong, but they did a famous edition of like Shakespeare stories in prose, and the Lamb prosaic Shakespeare was a big hit. And, probably people would read them to children. I don't think they were specifically just for children, but it's the same idea to, bringing it to the masses. Bring this culture that everybody's heard of to the masses. Well, I bet people were doing that in, if not the late 1800s, then certainly the early 1900s. But, of course, by far, the popularizer, the re-energizer of these fairy tales was the Walt Disney Company, and Walt Disney himself supervising it at first, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, to say nothing of all of the short cartoons, the cartoon shorts that would draw upon the fairy tale elements. And of course that process continued after Walt himself passed away with The Little Mermaid, which I know was originally Hans Christian Andersen. I'm sure that Hans Christian Andersen drew on folklore too. Or with The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I know it's a Victor Hugo, but it became cultural heritage, blah, blah, blah. And what did the Walt Disney Company, whether Walt himself, whether under Walt's supervision or afterwards, what did Walt Disney Company always do? It cutified the folklore. It made it kiddie. It made it cutesy. So, it perverted the culture. And I would argue that the perversion process leads to the pseudo-grooming that you see today. It's all part of how technology and mass media is used to affect the human race, to child-eyes us, to commodify the culture, to streamline the culture, to falsify the culture, to turn it inside out, to always turn against the past, the heritage, while here and there extending this arm as if it's honoring our great tradition. You see it now where the company kind of hates Walt. They kind of hate the memory of Walt Disney, but they still use him. Maybe at some point they won't. That's not going to prove me wrong. It's because they've been referring to him and using his name and his image for purposes of continuity, to sort of take away the criticism of other people saying, hey, you're not what you used to be. Hey, you're going against your previous values. They do the same thing with Marvel. They give awards, sometimes posthumous awards, to earlier Marvel creators. They gave one to Jack Kirby. I don't know what the fucking award was. They gave Jack Kirby, who died almost 30 years ago, they gave him like an Disney Architect Certificate Award or some shit like that. Whereas it would be a slam fucking dunk to say that Jack Kirby would not like a lot of what Walt Disney did with Marvel properties. If nothing else, the Eternals does not resemble anything, hardly anything at all, that Jack Kirby did. Not that I'm even defending Jack Kirby's Eternals. It's one of his worst works. But just the idea that the Walt Disney Company, as it is now, is still like putting a stamp of approval on someone like Jack Kirby in order to like make a pretense towards like cultural continuity. Like, we stride the culture like a colossus. We go back in time. I mean, at some point, what are they going to give William Shakespeare a fucking honorary Imagineering degree or some shit? But this is what, I mean, and you see it with other companies too, obviously. But the Walt Disney Company really is something. Really is a case in and of itself. It's an exemplar example of what big corporations, aided by evolving technology and mass media, do to human culture. They make it less and less human. They make it more and more artificial. They make it more and more superfluous. They grandstand more and more. They make overtures towards values that they don't have, values that they will immediately discard if the next current thing does not accord with them. I mean, that said, hey, the older Disney cartoons, they're obviously high quality. A lot of Disney product is high quality. Even recent Disney product is high quality, especially if you compare it to other stuff. I mean, The Mandalorian. I mean, I don't watch very many new TV shows, but The Mandalorian is something that I definitely looked forward to for a while and liked watching for a while. Have I seen the Boba Fett show? No. Not one episode. Have I seen Obi-Wan? No, not one episode. Zero interest. But so in my saying all of this, like I sort of said about J.R.R. Tolkien, I'm not just going to shit on the Walt Disney Company in every respect. When I was a kid, I really liked Walt Disney cartoons in the 80s. I stopped liking Disney around the time of The Little Mermaid. Was that their first new cartoon? I want to say that there was like another big new cartoon that they had, like, oh, the first major motion picture animated feature, Walt Disney, in 20 years or however many years it was. I want to say there was one before The Little Mermaid, but The Little Mermaid was more successful. And what I saw with The Little Mermaid, I saw it more with Aladdin and The Lion King and the other 90s Disney cartoon films. There was something about them that they had an icky feeling to me. It was there in the actual products, the actual movies, but it was much, much, much more so in the marketing of the films and the merchandise from the new films. There was something about how they made those films seem trendy. This is the cool thing. This is the new thing. It really felt like, here is a company that's trying to control my mind. I noticed the same thing with Steven Spielberg movies. I noticed this when I was a kid. I noticed that Steven Spielberg movies, especially, the way they were shot, the way they were directed, but especially the way Steven Spielberg would use music. Not always this, but like the quintessential type of scene would be the big swelling orchestral music while seeing a child or a group of children just with like an odd expression on their face. And it's like, it's meant to convey like the magic of childhood or the wonderment in the world, something along those lines. And in saying that, someone might hear that and might think, well, what the fuck's your problem? What, do you not like children having a nice time or, a good experience? No, the way I interpreted those scenes, and I think this is correct, what I got from those Steven Spielberg scenes or those Spielbergian scenes, because I can't give you an example of it, but it was in a lot of 80s media. I'm sure it's in a lot of media after the 80s too, but especially in the 80s, and I noticed that being a child in the 80s, a child of the 80s also. What I noticed, that was not the wonderment of childhood. That was a director preying upon the wonderment of childhood, trying to get into my head, and also, in conjunction with that, doing everything in his power to force me to look at that scene and, to some degree, in extension, to look at the entire film in one certain way. You can view this media in one certain way. It's like you're observing, a work of art or an object or a person, or you're experiencing a situation that you're in, and you're looking at things. You're looking at things in a figurative sense from all sides. You're looking at things from multiple sides. Let me view it over here. Let me view it over there, and then someone comes in. Steven Spielberg comes in, and he puts his hands on either side of your head, and especially if you're a child, to extend the analogy here. A child's head is very small. An adult male's hands are large. So here comes this guy, and he's putting his hands on your head, and he is going to turn your head and fix your head in a certain way, and he is going to implicitly or explicitly tell you, no, this is how you're going to look at this. This is how you're going to look at whatever is being shown in front of you. You will view this movie in a certain way, and you will approve of it. And your approval of it, this is the wonderment of childhood. Not whether you've experienced anything nice in your life. Okay, fine. For now, that's okay, he tells you. But your memories of childhood will be watching E.T. and The Goonies and whatever other fucking movie. Nothing against, nothing necessarily against those films or films like them. I think I've said I have a very fond memory of the Joe Dante Gremlins movies, and Joe Dante was an understudy of Spielberg. I think Spielberg was probably a producer or an executive producer on at least the first Gremlins movie, which I liked. But my point is that I could sense Spielberg and those like him in those scenes, really getting his hooks in, trying to get his hooks in me. The vampire turns your head a certain way, and then that's when he can sink his fangs in when you're not looking. I felt something very much like that with, when was The Little Mermaid? 88, 89, maybe 90, I don't know. But from The Little Mermaid on and into those 90s animated films that the Walt Disney Company did, every single one of them. And in part it was because they were new. In part I felt this because they were new. Whereas prior to that, in the 80s, I was watching older Walt Disney cartoons. And I liked them. But it was something about, this is the new thing. This is, la thing current. When it was suddenly the new thing and they upgraded propaganda and the marketing, I really noticed it. So, I'm not surprised that the current form of the Walt Disney Company, is doing what it's doing to Marvel and Star Wars. They get their hooks in, and then they continually cutify. You could say feminize. You could say that that's what it is. Whereas to go back to the original folk tales and the fairy tales, they were not cute. And a lot of the female characters, you kind of see this. A lot of the female characters were either flawed, or you really had to keep your eye on them because that nice lady might be a wicked witch. But this is a process, you know. This is a process of cutifying, and yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. I'm on a, I don't know if I even explained this. I'm on a car trip, and I'm at a stop, so I'm gonna stop now. And this may be the end of an episode, or I may talk more after this. But either way, I'll be stopping now. Maybe this will just be a fucking episode as it is, because I think I said something. If not, I'll come back and I'll talk about comic books.
Dear Susie, I ain't had sex in a while. I'm in jail with my chicken beating off to your pictures. You only writing letters cause I'm headed towards the riches. And I'm only writing letters cause your head game bitches. What's today's day? In today's time, sit-ups, push-ups, and write a new rhyme.
Okay, I'm on the home run, or the return drive. I've got a frozen coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know why they call it frozen coffee. It's not frozen, it's just the type with the chopped up ice bits in it. And with a roasted almond flavor shot in it. It's very good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about... we're going to go into comic books, and we're going to go into superheroes a little bit on this leg of the journey. So I was talking about J.R.R. Tolkien. I was talking about the Walt Disney Corporation and Walt Disney himself. One of the problems that people are running into is they're taking Tolkien, or they're taking the way that the older Disney productions were, or they're taking the way that the older Star Wars movies, or the way that the older Marvel comics were. They're taking them as like akin to Holy Scripture. Now, does that mean that I'm in favor of the new Amazon Lord of the Rings? Does that mean that I think that it's all just swell and good? What the new Star Wars movies are, or the Star Wars TV shows, or the Marvel shows, or the Marvel movies with the womans and the canned bullshit, the corporatized diversity. No, I don't think they're very good at all. I think the best/worst example that they've had financial success with was the Black Panther movie. I didn't think it was a bad movie. I didn't think it was a great movie. I thought it was okay. It was about as standard as you could get in most respects. But they seemingly successfully positioned the Black Panther movie and the Black Panther property as like mythology for black people, when it has nothing to do with actual African folklore or religion. Obviously wasn't created by black creators. Black Panther was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Yeah, I mean, just to cover all of my bases, yeah, black creators have worked on Black Panther since, And I'm not saying that the race of the character has to match the race of the person who works on the character or who wants to create the character or anything like that. All I'm saying is that Black Panther is not black myth. Black Panther is not black or African folklore in any authentic respect whatsoever. And yet, through technology and mass media and propaganda marketing, the Walt Disney Company was able to successfully put Black Panther over as if it said something extremely important and profound to the soul of Africans. And it's just false. If you like the movie, fine. If you really like the character, fine. But let's not pretend that these things are more than what they are. And to switch gears to a pretty much completely different target audience, Lord of the Rings fans have been thinking that their favorite property was akin to mythology for white people or folklore for white people for a long time. Now, does pop culture become the myth of our time? Well, I mean, in Ursat's mythology, yeah. But it's not like that kind of cultural interaction or way of existing doesn't have problems. It obviously has problems. I mean, we're a society that's uprooted. We don't have a connection to who we are or who we were, and the identities that we have are increasingly firmly in the control of corporations, NGOs, think tanks, blah, blah, blah. And they're just, they're increasingly plastic. And even if someone isn't in control of them, if the way you think of yourself, the way you think of your history and your worth on Earth is at the mercy of like algorithms and trends, I mean, that's pretty weak, and it's no surprise if people are in increasingly desperate mental situations. But that's what we have. We do not have robust or resilient, to use some vocabulary words that trendy corporations have really liked to use in the last several years. We don't have robust or resilient people. We have people who are at the mercy of what the television tells them. Not totally, but you know what I'm saying. You see the fake culture, the fake history, the fake mythology playing out in something like the Black Panther fandom or the Wakanda mythology. And a lot of more right-wing people would call that out and point and laugh at that. Or even just say, oh, isn't it a shame? Isn't it just gross that the Walt Disney Corporation took advantage of a marginalized community and sort of gave them their history in a very neo-colonialist fashion? And I would absolutely, I absolutely agree with a lot of those kinds of arguments. But at the same time, and this is what right-wing people or conservative people are not as able to see, something very similar happened almost 100 years ago, or at least 50 years ago, with J.R.R. Tolkien and the fervor over his works. This is not a true European or white mythology any more than Wakanda is a true African mythology. And what other kinds of things do I see playing out that one side wouldn't be able to see? Well, a lot lately, I've been hearing various YouTubers, not for the first time and not for the last, they're really upset about the current Captain America comic books. They don't like the people who are in charge of the newer Captain America comic books because what is in them often are conversations about how the good old apple pie USA was actually not that good, and there's still like, we're still like on a knife's edge of falling into a right-wing white supremacist dictatorship. This is what the people behind the Captain America comic books often think, which is a mainstream left-wing view that even in 2022 we need to really worry about the KKK. Not that the KKK doesn't exist, not that there aren't meaningful stories to be told about the KKK, but the KKK is fucking pathetic at this point, and it's borderline irrelevant. The relevancy it has is to point out how irrelevant it is. Like, you could put, and someone I know has put the KKK in a story, and a large part of what the story says, or at least what I got out of it, was that these people are pathetic. But nonetheless, it's a mainstream left-wing view in the U.S. to think that, like, if you have an American flag in your yard, which I don't. I'm not a big fan of the American flag, but that's another topic. That if someone has an American flag t-shirt, they very well may be a white supremacist or something like that. I mean, that's not far from what a lot of leftist people think. So they think that Captain America needs to be, like, constantly reflecting and apologizing for the country that he grew up in and the country that he fought for. So YouTubers, they're upset about the latest kerfuffle in the latest Captain America comic book, where I haven't read this. I haven't read a Captain America comic book in over a fucking decade. But they're upset about some conversation that Captain America has with a working class person in a recent Captain America comic book. And let me just put it this way. Captain America and the way certain people view the character of Captain America has long been a pet peeve of mine. I think that they endow way too much weight into this comic book character and film character that it's just really overblown. Now, that said, I had a Captain America action figure or two when I was growing up. For some reason, I had two Captain America action figures from the Secret Wars line of action figures, which I think was 1985. Somehow, in my infancy, I was given two, not one, but two Captain America action figures. And I never really liked Captain America, but I had the action figure when I was a very small child. And a long, long time later, I read the Ed Brubaker Captain America run. The first, 50 issues or so of which are really good, especially for Marvel superhero comic books. I would put roughly the first half of the Ed Brubaker Captain America run up against pretty much any other 50-issue run of a Marvel comic. Now, it's nowhere near as good as something like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing or Neil Gaiman's Sandman, but for Marvel superhero comic books, Ed Brubaker's Captain America, the first half of it is pretty damn good. So it's not as though I'm not receptive to the character. It's not as though I'm completely shitting on the character. But the way that fanboys talk about Captain America and what he represents and what he should represent, he's the best of us. I think that's really overblown, and I think it's kind of pathetic. And the statement that I want to make is like, well, they're reaching back towards like the heroes of their youth, the heroes that they used to know, either when they were kids or maybe their father liked Captain America comic books in the 80s. And they always, especially the more conservative or pseudo-conservative critics, they always make it seem as though Captain America used to be a lot more conservative or something. And maybe to some extent that could be true, but in the 70s, they had a storyline where Captain America fought the Secret Empire. This was the original Secret Empire storyline, and the leader of the Secret Empire, you don't see it on panel. It's not literally spelled out, but the reader who's paying any attention at all would intuit that the leader of the Secret Empire was none other than Richard Nixon himself. During the 80s, Captain America fought the Serpent Society or something like that. And something that the Serpent Society did was they turned Ronald Reagan into like an evil serpent man. So Captain America had to fight the Gipper, drawn as an evil snake man. Now you could say, well, look, they didn't literally spell out that Richard Nixon was evil. And look, they didn't say that Ronald Reagan was a evil snake man. They said that this other evil group turned him into one. But they would never do those kinds of things to a Democrat president in their little comic books. They would only think to do that to a Republican. And I mean, that kind of goes along to how these YouTube critics and these reactionary comic book critics, they say things like, if Jack Kirby was here today, he would hate these comic books. And in a sense, I kind of said this earlier with what Jack Kirby would think about the Marvel films, in particular the Eternals, because it wasn't his vision at all. Yes, if you transported Jack Kirby the way he was in whatever, 1976 or 1964 or 1988 or something, and you showed him a lot of the quote-unquote SJW elements in modern entertainment, including comic books and whatnot, he would probably not have a favorable reaction. But if you're talking about the way Jack Kirby was, and you somehow like kept him alive, or force his soul to undergo like artificial experiences to catch him up to date, then yeah, if Jack Kirby was still alive in the late 2010s or in the 2020s now, Jack Kirby would be an SJW. Jack Kirby would be a Twitter shithead. Jack Kirby would absolutely be calling Trump and people who voted for Trump Nazis. I have no doubt whatsoever. Now, did Jack Kirby ever do that? Did Jack Kirby ever go so far? Did Jack Kirby ever insult whatever, half the audience, half the country, in very blunt, childish, drastic terms? No, he did not, and I don't think he would have. But if he had been seeped in the same cultural muck as it's being brought to a boil in the last 12 years or so, I think Jack Kirby would have been turned into a shithead the same way so many other older cultural figures were turned into SJW, shitheads, unhinged, Trump derangement syndrome people. I think he absolutely would have. Not only that, but I think he would have lost a lot of talent, especially after 2020, the way a lot of other people have lost a lot of talent. They've lost their ability to think and to consider. Yeah, there are no real great culture creators out there. I'm thinking, in talking about this, I'm thinking specifically about the author Neil Gaiman, who I used to really like. I liked his stuff in the late 80s through the mid to late 90s. Neil Gaiman fast became a self-parody of himself around the year 2000, around the time when he sold out, I would say. He had a lot more interactions with Hollywood people and bigwig pop culture people. And he never wrote anything great since. He became a caricature. He found a lot of success streamlining his shtick, his overly precious, overwrought man of letters shtick. And, I mean, now he's a complete sellout. Does that mean that I'm, like, offended by the Sandman Netflix series? No. Do I have any interest in the Sandman Netflix series? No. What do I dislike most, just on face value, about the Sandman Netflix series? Is it all of the race-swapped characters or the gender-swapped characters? No. The first thing I see is that the Sandman himself has Caucasian skin and normal-looking eyes. The Sandman should have wild hair, pure white skin, not Caucasian. I don't give a shit about an African American woman playing the character of Death as much as I care about Dream himself, Morpheus, the Sandman. He needs pure white skin, and he needs black contacts. He needs to look humanoid, but otherworldly, kind of at the same time. When one of the Endless, which is what the characters are, and I know I'm getting off track, when one of the Endless abandons their post in the story of the Sandman, I think it's Destruction. The character of Destruction, he just goes off on his own. He just looks like a normal dude, a normal Caucasian I think he's redheaded dude. Why does he look exactly like a human? Because he's abandoned his supernatural station. So the point of the Endless, when they have power, is that they do not quite look human. And yet for Netflix, the Sandman Morpheus, you have a regular Caucasian guy with regular Caucasian skin, normal eyes, and relatively normal hair. His hair needs to be kind of crazy, because Morpheus's hair is kind of crazy. He needs black contacts, and he needs skin that's a little too white. And because I'm not seeing that, does that mean that I'm, like, anal retentive and I need everything to, like, match the books exactly? No. But I see the laziness of yet another comic book adaptation. I see laziness, and I see a lack of understanding, because originally in the books, the Endless need to look not quite human. Humanoid, but not quite human. Or when the Endless appear to, like, animals, like when the Endless are in, like, I think the story is A Dream of a Thousand Cats, or when we see the Endless appear to, like, alien life forms. They look like the life forms they're around, but they look a little different. You know, they have black eyes. They have out-of-control hair. They have pure white skin, not Caucasian, pure white. And yet, in this Netflix adaptation, I'm seeing normal people, and that's a change. That's a signal to me that the people behind the show, including 2020's Neil Gaiman, do not understand things anymore, which is no shock. I mean, I'm not offended by it, but I'm not shocked either. Anyway, to go back to the comic book people, the reactionary comic book critics, so I was talking about Captain America, and in the 70s he fought pseudo Richard Nixon. In the 80s he fought Snake Man Ronald Reagan. And yet, every now and then he would at least say, communism isn't good, I guess. Apparently. But even like the ideal of Captain America, whatever these reactionary critics have in their head, I don't think this is an ideal worth really rallying around. I see all of these former pop culture heroes, whether it be Captain America, whether it be He-Man, whether it be Luke Skywalker, and yes, I will say this, whether it be Frodo or Bilbo Baggins, you look at history, you look at what has happened, and the ideals that these characters more or less stood for, those ideals have been crushed or have been perverted or finagled around. And I think being preoccupied with pop culture, even pop culture that, at least on the surface, stands for these traditional values, I think that has actually undermined the civilization, the tradition, and just humanity itself.
And the way we should look at it is that these heroes, these gods, have failed the ideals that they were supposed to represent. And that's not surprising once you realize that these were fake heroes and fake gods in the first place. They were made by individuals and were owned by corporations. They were not grown organically out of the soil of a common humanity. So it would be wrong-headed to keep worshiping these fake gods and trying to follow these fake heroes who have already failed to uphold the ideals that they were supposedly endowed with. And if you like any of those ideals, then you're just banging your head against the wall. You have to kind of be your own hero at this point and stop hoping that Captain America is gonna somehow fight for you on the astral plane or whatever.
Or even in the case of Captain America, I mean, Captain America doesn't represent traditional values as much as he represents quite manufactured values of mid-century, mid-20th century Americana, which you might say is preferable to the bullshit, the insane bullshit of today, but it's still fake. I mean, a lot of what we think about when we think of Americana, and that was created in Hollywood specifically to energize the population and make them feel patriotic and to wed their patriotism directly to going to war, World War I and then World War II. The marketing departments were working overtime, and a lot of Americana was created on a Hollywood lot or in Madison Avenue offices because the American public did not want to go to war, to either of those wars. It's worth pointing out that in Captain America #1, he punches Hitler, I think on the cover of Captain America 1. That was before the U.S. was involved in World War II, and that was when most people in the U.S. didn't want to go to World War II. So even then, in Captain America 1, Captain America is propagandizing, and Captain America, the figure, is being used to cajole the American public that, yeah, we need to go fight Hitler. We need to get involved in this war. You may think it has nothing to do with us. The majority of the people are not for going to war against Hitler, but Captain America, on the first issue of his comic book series, is making a bold, violent statement that goes directly against the wishes of the American people at the time. I mean, that's a lot different than whatever, European folkloric tradition Tolkien drew on for his characters. But the commonality is that Captain America is not a hero of folklore. He's a corporate creation. Same with Gandalf. Now, the figure of Gandalf draws on the figure of the wizard, which would include non-copyrighted characters that go back centuries and centuries, obviously. You have King Arthur's Merlin, and aspects of Merlin absolutely went into Gandalf. But the figure of the wizard was devised by lots of storytellers over lots of centuries. Nonetheless, Lord of the Rings is artificial. Captain America is artificial. And the reactionary critics now point out that, hey, look, they're emasculating our heroes. They're either giving us new heroes who are female, or they're giving us male heroes who are femi, or they're recasting older alpha male heroes as, in some sense, weak. The way supposedly Luke Skywalker turns his back on the Jedi or whatever happens in that movie. But I would argue that this is a process, and the seeds of what is happening recently was always baked into the cake. I mean, I've often used the example of SNL. People talk about how, in the 70s or in the 80s or in the 90s, that's when Saturday Night Live was really good. Well, I see Saturday Night Live as a cultural institution that has its own lifespan, and it has changed. It has been a process. It's a conveyor belt, and it's a process that interacts with the evolving society around it. And because it's technology, because it's non-human in the sense that it's an artificial work being conveyed through fiber optics, cables, and before that, cathode ray tubes, all of this has an overall anti-human bent to it. And we know what the characteristics of it is, what the characteristics of the modern process is. It's emasculation. It's a changing of what the feminine is also. And of course, there's all sorts of good, valuable people of every bent. But we see what the overall trend is. That's not to say that I think all men should be like Conan the Barbarian or something. That should be obvious. But there's another one too. If the generations of recent past did have all these aggro alpha male heroes, then why did the emasculation process, why did the anti-human trajectory of the society continue? Now, I mentioned He-Man earlier. Think of He-Man, think of Optimus Prime, think of Lion-O, and all of those heroes from the 80s. The roles that Arnold played, the Sylvester Stallone movies. And yet, wouldn't you say that the generation that grew up watching those characters and had those, very cut and dried alpha male role models, they nonetheless grew up to be weaker than their fathers. They were a weaker generation than their fathers. Now, in some sense, maybe they're more sensitive, sure, but let's just cut the crap. They're weaker. They had less fucking balls, absolutely. And the example that I've given is, of course, Chris Chan. You see how Chris Chan changed over the years, and when young Christian Weston Chandler, or actually young Christopher Weston Chandler at the time, was looking for a male role model, Chris settled on Optimus Prime. And even more so than He-Man, because He-Man has the softer Prince Adam side, at least sometimes. Optimus Prime is just straightforward male. The Transformers were all male characters until I think there was like one female Transformer towards the end of like Generation 1, I think. I wasn't a fan of it long enough to know. But what influenced Chris was Transformers. And look at where that, universally male property with the, in a sense, the perfect alpha male role model, Optimus Prime, look at where that led Chris Chan. It was not a good role model. Not good role models. Especially not for, would they be good role models for girls? No, but they were geared towards guys, and they're geared towards boys. And I certainly liked Transformers when I was a kid too. But look at where it led. Not good role models. For the simple fact that they're not real. It's a boy's role model should be his father and the older males in his life in his proximity that he can learn from and have examples set for him directly with his naked eyes, not through a screen. I don't care what old-timey president you want to name. Presidents are not good role models. I don't care who you're watching on TV. Trump is a terrible role model. Ronald Reagan, not a good role model. JFK, not a good role model. You're seeing these people through screens. They're not real. It's some form of a lie. And that's why if it's a caricature or a representation of an alpha male, the way Optimus Prime is, or He-Man pretty much is, or something like that, Rambo, Arnold, it might make it easy. All that does is make it easier for pop culture to get a foothold in your fucking brain. Okay? I'm not saying don't watch TV. If you don't want to watch TV, that might be great. But I'm not telling you not to. I mean, obviously, I watched it. Do I think it had a detrimental effect? I think TV is the worst thing that's happened to the human race. I think it's absolutely worse than the nuclear bomb. Worse than guns. I think TV has had the biggest effect on the human race than any other tool or whatever you want to call it, and it's been it's terrible effect overall. Moving images of things and people that aren't really there. Images that can be created out of nothing, taken out of context, and they serve as role models for the young. Now, if if you took some SJW character today and put it like in front of a child, then whether it's today or in the 1980s, if you somehow projected this, whatever, SJW heroine back in time, then the odds are that probably the parent, if not the child himself or herself, would not take to the character. But especially in the 80s, if you put He-Man in front of a little kid, then the little boy's going to like it. And the little boy's parents are probably not going to see much, if anything, wrong with it. And it's ironic that probably the personality types of the people from the 80s that said things like, oh, this is just like too aggressive, this is too mean. They might shield kids from He-Man, but they would push whatever SJW heroes there are now. They would push like Rey from Star Wars onto kids. Rey who has like no personality. Rey who displays like, no genuine fucking human character traits at all. Who's just like a blank slate of reaction, rage, don't need no man. Let go of my hand. So fucking contrived. I don't even care. I saw The Force Awakens and I had a good time seeing it. As I was watching it, I knew that, well, as soon as I reflect on any of this at all, it's gonna fall apart for me, but I'll enjoy it while I'm watching it. And like the last Jedi, I watched it for free like a year after it came out. And did I hate it? No, I didn't feel anything. I felt it was really boring. It could barely keep my attention. Same with Rogue One. And I didn't see Solo or The Rise of Skywalker. But my point is, the personality type of the person in the 80s, I don't even know if they called them progressives back then, but they would say like, oh, He-Man and the Transformers, they're too aggressive. They're way too violent. They shouldn't be role models. They would be the same type that would force SJW heroes into the consciousness of children now. Now, some of where I was going with all this was that the people who are upset about Captain America now, and they want the old Captain America, they want classic Cap and classic Luke, they want those for their kids. They have a lot in common with certain leftist personality types that think that the thing that little black boys need more than anything is to see Miles Morales, a black Spider-Man, on the silver screen. This is something that I remember encountering right as the SJW thing was starting to become a thing. I can't give examples, but it was either blogs or an article or podcasts or, some combination of all three, where I would hear these people, usually in their 20s, usually childless, usually women, usually white, and despite not having children, despite being white, they thought that they knew exactly what was best for little black children, especially little black male children. They thought that what they needed was to be colonized by the Walt Disney Company as early as possible, as much as possible. They need to identify with a character that is property of the Walt Disney Company so that the Walt Disney Company can own their personality, not unlike the way that the Walt Disney Company went on to own African mythology via Wakanda. Well, these supposedly left-wing pundits who would supposedly be anti-corporation, they thought that we need to get black children to identify as much as possible, as early as possible, with a fake character, with a fake culture hero called Miles Morales. And in saying all this, I think that the first year or two of Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man comics were the best comics that Brian Michael Bendis had written in 8 years at that point. The early Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man, I haven't reread it since it came out, but at the time, kind of good. Yeah, good. Not great, not innovative, really. But, yeah, if you're going to criticize Brian Michael Bendis, who's the comic writer who wrote those, the early Miles Morales would not rate in a top, 20 or 30 list of the worst Brian Michael Bendis comics. They were, not bad. So it's not like I have an axe to grind against the character of Miles Morales. If I have to see another Spider-Man movie, I don't want to. But if I have to see another Spider-Man movie, I'd rather see my Miles Morales Spider-Man movie than another Peter Parker Spider-Man movie. Simply for the fact that I'm tired of Peter Parker. I don't like the current actor who plays Peter Parker. But even if he was recast or something, if I have to, I'm not arguing for it. But, there's my overture. There's my olive branch. I'd rather see Miles Morales Spider-Man movie than a Peter Parker Spider-Man movie. How's that? But there's something weird and there's something wrong with these childless white women who think they know that the best thing... I think they said, they've said this line. You might even be able to research and find out who said this, that made it stick in my craw. But this woman, or these women in various places who for a while they were just saying, what little black boys need, they need this for their emotional well-being and so they can grow up to be successful people, is they need to see a little black Spider-Man or a black Spider-Man on the silver screen in a Disney production. Yeah, get those children fucking appellated, interpellated by the Walt Disney Company as early as possible. The Walt Disney Company, who is the destroyer. They are like the star destroyer of genuine culture and have been for nearly 100 years. They are a gigantic star cruiser known for just exploding planets at this point of actual people and creating like fake culture, fake planets of humanity in their wake. Yeah, so, but there's a parallel to be made between these mostly white male reactionary critics who are like, I want my little boy to see Captain America, a good old-fashioned cat. There's a parallel between that and these mostly left-wing, white, mostly leftist critics who are like, the thing little black boys need is Miles Morales, Spider-Man on the silver screen. What's the commonality? Both types. They want the corporations to give them culture. They want fake culture. They want pop culture, but I repeat myself. Fake culture, pop culture, artificial culture that's outside of anyone's control, really. Because the people who are making it are basically NPCs running off of algorithms at this point. There is no thoughtfulness. I'm going over the top, but there is less thoughtfulness as things go along over the decades. There is less free will. There is less individuality. There's less individuality, but there is also less genuine collectiveness. Hercules or Cuchulainn, however you pronounce it, from the Irish mythology. These are culture heroes, the various culture heroes whose exploits were handed down through the years of whether it's a Scottish tribe in Africa, tribe in the Philippines. Those were culture heroes. In the U.S., we had Paul Bunyan. That's the closest fucking hokey shit we had. Johnny Appleseed, hokey bullshit from the United States of America that has never produced high culture. I mean, it's really telling that, who is the greatest American poet? The greatest American poet is T.S. Eliot, who left America. And T.S. Eliot, who basically became the quintessential British man. He ran as far as he could from America, and I don't blame him. Who else? Henry Miller, who ran from America. Even back then, Henry Miller, who called the skyscrapers of New York City beautiful white prisons, and he was right. And he wrote Tropic of Cancer, which is the last book of a sort. It's the last book. And I think that's probably the greatest novel that an American has ever written. And he doesn't get credit because he's not in their little club. But Henry Miller left the U.S. T.S. Eliot left the U.S. And they left a U.S. that was far less corrupt than the current iteration. But yeah, I mean, in the pre-modern world, when we had genuine culture, the heroes, they were, if not your father, your older brother, your uncle, the people of your tribe, the people of your real community. When we had real communities, you had folk heroes who stood the test of time and whose memory and whose exploits served the community when the community remembered them. Now we have fake heroes like Captain America, who has always been a fake hero, and all these other stupid... I liked him when I was a kid. I liked He-Man. But, I mean, He-Man didn't it doesn't do anybody any good. It just gets a foothold in someone's brain for the toxic, out-of-control bullshit, nonsense, artificial propaganda to just stream in. So they start opening up your mind with Optimus Prime. It's, oh, this is a worthy role model. And then before long, you're believing in multiverses, and you're saying that it's fine for human beings to be in a relationship of some sort with a cartoon character who is their husband in some bizarre sense, and this is all fine, and this is not mental illness at all, and this is not out of control. No, it's totally out of control. It's totally out of control. Well, I'm done with my drive, and I might put this one up. I might actually put this one up. We'll see. This is the end of the episode. I thought I'd go a little bit over the top towards the end, just, I don't know, for your amusement or something, but, okay, so, this is, fake Andy Warhol, and I'm ending this episode.
Once upon a time, the world made sense. Now there's nothing straight enough to rebel against. Ain't been no work since '82. There's only one thing left to do. Make sure they know we've been here when we're through. I ain't had no fun in London since the Hammersmith Ballet. New York City's boring since the punks all went away. Tokyo's gone techno and Berlin's going crazy. I ain't had no fun since Hammersmith Ballet. Now way. So do you wanna hear the story of my life? Got no reason to go home tonight. Well, life's a drag and then you're dead. It's just me and the boys and a bottle of red, telling lies about better days ahead. I ain't had no fun in London since the Hammersmith Ballet. New York City's boring since the punks all went away. Tokyo's gone techno and Berlin's going crazy. I ain't had no fun since Hammersmith. Had no fun since Hammersmith. Had no fun since Hammersmith. Hallelujah. I ain't had no fun. I ain't having no fun. I ain't had no fun.
Ah, now I know. Now I know where I am and who I am. Back in that old shithole where I was born. Later, when I begin to explore it, why, it's a different city. A little more horrible. Gets worse all the time. Today, I think it's the ugliest, filthiest, shittiest city in the world. When I was a kid, there was hardly anything that we have today. No telephone, no automobiles, no nothing, really. It was rather quaint. There was color even in the buildings. But as time went on, why, it got more horrible to me. It's no wonder that I had these goddamn recurrent nightmares all my life. I don't know how I ever survived, why I'm still sane. In fact, I don't know now whether I'm really awake or dreaming. My whole past seems like one long dream, punctured with nightmares.